start by introducing everybody, and these guys are going to introduce themselves. This is certainly a place where you can ask questions, so feel free. Audience interaction is more than welcome. So Susan from UberEats, did you want to give us a bit of understanding of what you do?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Susan Anderson. I'm the general manager for UberEats across Queensland, New Zealand, and a number of different cities. Been with UberEats since the launch here in Queensland, and prior to that was in the UK, working for Amazon in the grocery business. So I set up their 1-hour food delivery business there. So moved here with actually for the Commonwealth Games, which my husband's on, and so yeah, and loving Queensland. It's great.
And Ramzey?
Obviously, I'm Ramzey Choker, the co-director of the grounds.
Perfect. Suzee?
Hi, I'm Suzee Brain and Poulter food consultants. So we work with public sector, with institutions and with private property developers in working out the food strategies for their assets or the precincts that they're custodians of.
And Joost, just in case there are a few people who weren't here earlier when you spoke.
I'm just a creative guy that has a crack at anything.
So we're going to start. One of the big things that gets talked about a lot at the moment is UberEats. So we're going to start, and we're going to have a look at the different, I guess, the different ideas and how everybody feels. This is such a different panel, and we're going to see what that means to everybody. So it's the rise of UberEats. And I guess, Ramzey, first question for you is, what does that mean for a traditional restaurant as UberEats rises and people stay at home in their sweatpants eating?
It's a hard one, you know. For me, I use UberEats, and it's amazing, and it's efficient, it's easy, and convenient. That's why everyone's using it. I do honestly think it is dangerous for the traditional restaurant, obviously because it's taken away their service. But if you don't create that, that's why the experience economy is so important. If you're not creating something that people want to go to other than food and beverage, because everyone should be doing that good, you're going to be in serious trouble. So that's where it comes into play. It's got to be about the experience. It's got to be about, you know, the customer journey. It's got to be about more than just food and beverage.
Yeah, sure. And we talk a lot about how UberEats affects the restaurants, but what we don't talk a lot about is how that affects the fresh food. So the fruit and veg, the fishmonger, the butcher. So Susan, obviously you are probably more knowledgeable on UberEats, so we might get you to answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is that people are not making choices between going out for a social evening in a restaurant versus eating at home. That is not the trade-off. I was on a panel with Justin Hemmes, who runs the Merivale Group, and he talked about the fact that he believes that restaurants are uniquely protected from digital evolution. And I think that is right, because if you're going to meet friends and you're going to have a really lovely evening, then you don't trade that off in order to have UberEats at home. It's a very different experience. What we are seeing is this evolution towards actually people using products such as UberEats in order to get really high quality food at home or at the beach or at the park or wherever they are at the office, rather than them necessarily having to kind of cook that themselves. And so whether that's, you know, myself, I'm a working mum, it means that actually gives me some time in order to be able to spend a bit of time with my kids, or at least kind of put the washing on rather than cook. And so, you know, it's that kind of time. And I think the piece around innovation with restaurants, I think one of the things that we've been surprised by, and particularly in Queensland and Brisbane, I think there's a lot of fantastic innovators here. We have over 40 restaurant brands now on the UberEats platform that don't exist in the real world. They're in kitchens that are already there, and we have these entrepreneurs creating these new restaurants from that, and a really fantastic way to generate more revenue through existing real estate.
Yeah, certainly I work for a couple of restaurants that do it, and it's a really niche market where they can make some extra money when they're traditionally quiet, so whether that be lunches for some people or late night dining, et cetera, et cetera. So I suppose a lot of people here are leasing agents, real estate architects. The big thing for me when I walk around is how many Uber drivers are around, and what we can do in our spaces and in our leasing agreements and retail spaces to adapt to that and how we move forward, and instead of saying no, we don't like that trend, working with the trend and making sure that the venues are sufficient. So Suzee, that is definitely up for your alley.
Yeah, that's our space. So since about 2015, I think we've been recommending to developers that they actually start to physically plan space for Deliveroo and Uber and those sorts of people to have space within the restaurant precincts dedicated to ease of access for those sorts of things. But we're expanding that thinking more now too, and particularly in things like the education sector. It's now an opportunity where you can't perhaps get fixed retail to stack up, that there is a chance to start to create some commercial arrangements to offer, say, a student dining facility that doesn't have a fixed kitchen, but it's got an Uber offer available so that we can get more food to more people more often. I think from a leasing point of view, it means we need to start to look at things like turnover provisions in leases. If it's not taking away from the dining economy, it's only going to continue to grow the revenues for the retailers, and we need to see some upside for that back to the developer as well.
Yeah, sure. I don't know if anybody's been to Jimmy Grant's in Melbourne in Fitzroy, but they, and I actually stood in wonder for about an hour and a half, they have an UberEats concierge, and you go there and I'm wondering if you've seen it, anybody's seen it anywhere else, but you go there and the UberEats drivers just line up, and there's one guy, it's his job to make sure everybody gets the right orders, and I would have watched 300 orders go through one day, and I just think, are there other people doing that, or is that just a made establishment thing?
No, I mean, there's even for commercial applications now, there are like internalised versions of that. So within office buildings, you can now have a whole concierge platform for your food court below the building, let's say. And, sorry, Susan, cutting into her space, but, it's providing a private alternative to Uber for the tenants with that sort of offering.
Yeah, sure. And just, I suppose for you, it's probably, is it something that you've done before? You're very big on the pop-up and events and activations.
I'm obviously a big believer in zero waste.
Sure.
So for us, it's caused, I know that people that are in the waste industry say it's, especially in apartment buildings, it's been a massive spike in how much waste is generated now. Mm-hmm. So that to me is something that needs to be sorted out.
Yeah, and have you considered potentially doing something that, obviously your restaurants have no waste, but there are restaurants that do. Potentially there's a way of changing an Uber menu every week so that it is things that are, would naturally go to waste, so restaurants
I'm
would do
more
that.
talking about packaging.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know, like George and other guys that they just say, oh my God, Joost, if you saw the amount of waste that we're generating, it would kill you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And that's one thing that I think we need to look at. I mean, look at Anthony Pratt is really kicking goals in America because Amazon chose him over others, even though his boxes were more expensive, but because they were made from recycled content. And so they consciously chose to go with that manufacturer because it was a box made from recycled material. And, I think that's really, you've got to start thinking about how endlessly recyclable materials are used in something like that. And because at the moment we're just adding, the landfill is just growing faster and faster and faster. So it's contaminated waste once you put food in it and that sort of stuff.
And that is all things that I think our landlords can start to embrace. Again, from work with public sector and education, we've got a lot more traction from clients in those sectors who are keen to embrace all of that in their procurement process for the food tenants. And that's the role that's going to continue to now spill over into public sector.
Absolutely. We work with a lot of people who are just, I've worked with for 5 or 6 years, who are just starting to get into it and looking at those things. To put you on the spot, Susan, is UberEats looking at those problems and the things that are coming from the waste?
Yeah, we absolutely are. So, the packaging we provide restaurants with is fully recyclable in terms of the bags. We're still day one in this business, this industry. We're not even a year old in Brisbane, and in fact, even globally, kind of the whole business is coming up for 18 months old. And so I think this is absolutely on our radar. I don't think we yet have the full answer of what we can do, but in a world where we are working with a substantial number of restaurants, then that immediately enables us to help people with buying power in order to be able to think about actually what is the right way to be doing this in a new evolving industry. And I think kind of to your point, Joost, if you think about the Amazon model, to me, Uber and food delivery it's the equivalent of online retail, but coming to the food space. We need to figure out what does that mean in terms of how we should do that over the next few years. So I don't think we have the answers, but it's absolutely on our radar.
Yeah, perfect. So I want to talk about pop-ups and events and activations. It is a huge market at the moment. It seems to be what everybody is coming to me for personally. And I think everybody on this couch has had some or a lot of experience in that. But Joost, I wanted to get your opinion on why they're so popular and...
Well, many people regard the Greenhouse in 2008 as being the world's first, true pop-up restaurant, which wasn't my intention really it was actually initially supposed to be a house.
Yeah, that's a pretty good claim to fame, to
I know.
be honest.
Well,
so...
but I actually, when it started becoming, because the pop-up industry is an incredibly wasteful industry. You're building stuff that then 3 months later gets tossed out or gets,
Sure.
So I wasn't very proud of that whole idea, but for me it was a great way, especially in places like Sydney, and then for the Food and Wine Festival, we were very conscious about the materials that we used, so mostly the materials were, had upcycled. But it was a great way to get our messages across about zero waste, and it influenced like a guy like Dan Barber with his wasted pop-ups in New York and London. That wouldn't have happened with us doing our pop-ups. That influenced that kind of thinking. So huge waste reduction in restaurants globally because of these being able to get the message out in a way that you probably couldn't have done. I mean, they can't give you a site opposite the Opera House for more than 8 weeks, and it's a great way to get a massive audience very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
And as we talked about before, through social media, you get these massive uptake and then it's gone. So people get excited and it's a natural thing.
Yeah, it certainly gets the community excited. Ramzey, you don't necessarily do pop-ups, but your business is retail first. What you do is a pop-up and an event and an activation, essentially, if you do it every Tuesday or Wednesday, is it?
We did do Sculptures by the Sea 3 years in a row, but the amount it costs to basically develop and build, it's phenomenal. So, and you do get a lot of waste from it. So this year we actually didn't do it for that reason. It's not economically viable.
For those who don't know, can you just tell us a bit about Sculptures by the Sea?
Sculptures by the Sea obviously is on Bondi Beach. There's obviously millions and millions of people that come, and it's over, I think, a 6 or a 4 week period. And it's basically everyone puts their sculptures in and they're aligned along Bondi Beach. So, this year we didn't do it for exactly that reason. The amount of hard work and the effort and the amount of waste that goes into it after is not normal.
Yeah, sure. And Suzee, when you're building or helping build and suggesting what should happen, are you now planning for pop-up spaces and commercial kitchens that everybody can use to make their brownies or whatever it is that they're doing in those spaces these days?
Certainly it is wanting, developers are wanting to incorporate it more, but there must be a mandate that it's considered within the sustainable volume of the total development. So there's no surer way to piss off a sitting tenant than to oversupply in pop-ups that don't give you a good return either. So it has to be done sustainably, and I think what we did at Tram Sheds is a really good example of that, where the landlord fits out some casual mall leasing kitchen space that's then available for pop-up, but it was considered and planned very carefully and curated into the sustainable volumes in the mix, so we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul in that experience, and that's really the key.
Yeah, sure. Now, there's been a few this year that I would consider disastrous media around festivals and pop-ups, particularly in Sydney. There was 1 or 2. I want to know how you all feel about the pop-up. Is it creating problems? Is it creating people not wanting to go to normal restaurants or retail? Because what I'm seeing is that everybody's looking for an experience, which is what Ramzey you're creating and Joost you're creating, but they're going to these pop-ups that are being done by people who aren't necessarily seasoned professionals, and then they're making mistakes, and that's just creating problems. So I was wondering if anybody has an opinion on that or how that works.
I think over a year ago, a year and a half ago, the whole truck phase came out, and it was a big trend, and obviously a lot of damage came because of people weren't ready for the influx of the amount of people, and for me it's kind of died off now. I'm not sure. I haven't been to one for a while, so yeah, I'm not sure. I think it has died off in Sydney.
I suppose with the trucks, Suzee, you would have seen that. I know a lot of retailers were angry that trucks in Brisbane particularly could just pull up and plug in anywhere
and go anywhere,
and not paying
yeah.
any rent. You know, the
Yes.
people paying $100,000 a year in rent, and they're just popping up a truck and sticking, plugging it in. That causes issues.
Yeah, as we say, you've got to think sustainably about these things. But there's also myths that need to be busted about food trucks. So at the end of the day, a truck is only one production person and one counter hand. And so a queue forms that makes it look like it's hugely successful. But in fact, the volumes that they can serve are still only a couple of hundred people. Now, if you've still got 10,000 people coming through a development, you've got to think very carefully about how do I serve those 10,000 people, and a bunch of food trucks isn't going to be enough to process those people. So again, there's still got to be science and strategy behind when to use pop-ups, when should you use fixed in making sure that a development is going to be able to process as many people as possible quickly and efficiently so that everyone makes profit and the landlord gets a return.
Yeah, sure. Certainly, I've been in contact with Uber when we did the Brisbane Ice Cream, my company did the Brisbane Ice Cream Festival in here, which had about 45,000 people in the first 12 hours click on attending, which sent me into a major spin, as you can imagine. But just on what you can cope with, Uber contacted us and said, oh, we'd love to, deliver ice cream. And at the time it was just, no, thank you, I can't deal with that. But the people that we were working for at the time said, no, let's do it. The more people, the better. Have you experienced anything like that where it's become a problem for you, or just...
I mean, in that instance, absolutely went really well. We had kind of people wanting to get tickets for the ice cream festival. They couldn't get tickets, it sold out, and so then they could use UberEats in order to get that delivery. And I think it's, I think the way that the food entrepreneurs are thinking about UberEats, it's a way to take that truck and be able to get to people that are beyond just that location at that one point in time. And the platform's easy enough to be able to get up and running on it as a restaurant within 24 hours from our side, even quicker if people can move that fast. So from a pop-up perspective, or anybody who wants to try it, it's pretty easy to kind of turn it on, plug in, and then go. Obviously, I think what we have found in some instances is that the demand that comes through is higher than people expect, and sometimes that can take time to ramp up the staffing in the kitchen in order to make sure you can fulfill on that. And similarly, as we talked about before, people need to consider what the operations are going to be like in the building itself. If you have a stream of delivery drivers coming in, there's got to be a way to do that that does not impact the ambience of the restaurant overall. And so I wouldn't say there's been any issues, but I think it's things that people are learning, and we're building out what actually best practice looks like for that in order for it to be a great experience for both people who are still there for the atmosphere of eating in, as well as people who want it to be delivered at home pretty quickly.
Perfect. Now, Joost, you were telling me outside that when you opened the greenhouse, you had lines down the street. So can you give us a quick rundown on what the greenhouse was to start with, but that it sat 70 people and you had lines down the street of 500 people?
Yeah.
How did you cope with that?
Walking up and down with roasted nuts saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like I remember, but that's the thing, with a pop-up, it's short and everyone feels that they're scared they're going to miss out, so they do crazy things to try
And nobody's booking for a pop-up as a general rule, so you actually don't know on the other side what
and
you're
we were
getting
completely shocked as well by, all of them, how, I mean, it sounds stupid, but even in Sydney, we weren't expecting that kind of support. Sydney to be, I think Sydney is a city that actually embraces new ideas much more so than Melbourne or other cities that I've been to. I think that they're hungrier for new ideas, and whether it's systems that we used, just the expressions of interest from other hospitality owners. How did you do that? What was the system that you used for, milk, for instance? much more adopted, whereas Melburnians are much more conservative. And so we weren't expecting that from Sydney.
Yeah, sure. Does anybody have any questions about pop-ups, events and activations? I know, we often get asked, and I'm sure, Suzee, you get asked all the time by leasing agents, what's the best practice and how should I do it? Does anybody have a question at all? No? Okay, no problem.
There's a question at the back.
Oh, is there? What can I help you with? Just behind you, Nick's got that mic there, yeah.
Hello. Yep. I'm from Sydney, so thanks for that. Just interested in what point someone that has employed in a pop-up proposition looks at the success of that and thinks that it's something that they can maintain as a retail concept.
Does anybody want to take that? I think probably Suzee.
At what point does it pop over to become a fixed facility?
We get pop-ups. I live in Manly, and we get pop-up stores a lot down there. And some
For me,
are
it's, sorry
quite
to jump in,
viable.
for me it's council approval. We always, yeah, to be honest.
So from a property planning perspective, I mean, despite any ideas that you might have to want to retire and open a coffee shop on the far north coast or something, that the average turnover for a cafe in Australia is $600,000. So really, if anything is hitting the $500,000 mark as a property owner, it's time to be thinking about it becoming a fixed facility and paying you about 14% in return for that. If it's under that, then it's a good time to keep it as a pop-up.
Thank you.
Anybody else? I would like to talk about, if this is okay with you guys, the word trends. So I hate the word trend. I hate the word viral. As a marketer, I really dislike that whole prospect. However, that's how the world is going in the food world. So I really firstly want to ask how you feel about the word trend, whether it has positive or negative connotations for you. Ramzey, I suppose you're the trend I get asked for the most, so.
I hope I'm not a trend. Yeah, I believe it just comes back to your passion, what you're truly passionate about, and how to fight through that trend. I see a lot of things going on about health now, but I don't think that's a trend. I think the world's moving that way. I don't like that word. Yeah.
Yep. Suzee?
If I use the word trend in a headline in one of our newsletters, I'll get 10% better open rate than using any other type of headline. So
100%.
I'm a pro-trend.
Joost?
I don't know, I think about this a lot because if you look at, things that have really changed, like smartphones, like a true trend I think takes between 10 and 15 years to totally, one that radically changes the way we live. And you could go back 300-400 years to the tulip craze, that took 10 to 15 years and all of a sudden everybody was buying one tulip bulb for the cost of a year's wage.
Sure.
Or, because I think it's, I think about it from a point of view that I'm hoping that things improve. And I think that the next 10 years are so incredibly exciting because of all this new technology, because of our understanding and the way we can access information like we've never accessed before. And there's so many great things going on, and with companies like Google and Apple and Uber and all these things that, like, I see the Uber concept as an opportunity for people that are growing produce. So I'll give you one example. A friend of mine, Stephen Hook in the UK, sends out to 8,000 people every week milk from his farm. It's raw milk, and it mostly goes to parents who have kids that are autistic or that have these huge benefits from drinking unpasteurized milk. And you've got one guy in California who's got, one guy in California's got 400 cows and he turns over $12 million US. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine saying to an Australian farmer who's got 400 cows, you could turn over $12 million US off your 400 cows? But he's done that because he's been able to get direct to the consumer. The consumer has complete faith in the producer. There's a direct connection. And that's sort of where it's going back because there's no trust anymore. So people don't trust where they're getting their stuff from. And it's a little bit the reason why I think UberEats Because if you really trust the restaurant brand, then you know that they're getting the best milk, they're getting the most amazing cheese. Like somebody brought up the cheese making thing. Again, being allowed to make unpasteurized raw cheeses has meant that, I get my milk from a guy who's got 12 cows. He supplies 400 families. I'm just talking about milk now, but it could be about strawberries. It could be about, all these different products. So I think that in Italy alone, there's 4,000 dairy farmers that have vending machines and are supplying people direct. So I think that there's a huge ability, and that combined with urban growing of food, and then having the systems in place that allow you to access somebody that's growing great produce within possibly 500 metres of where you live, that's technology, and that's super exciting, and it brings honesty back because you're connecting, which is what I think we need.
I think I live in a world between restaurant owners and PR marketing and loving the trends. What I hear from the two boys is that it's a trend will hopefully become, if it's good, it will become a great retail space or a great restaurant. I remember a couple of years ago someone said to me, I'm going to open a burger shop, it's on trend. And this older guy who runs a pub turned around and said, burgers have been on trend for 50 years in America. It's not a trend, it's a thing that people are eating. And it really made me look at what's happening. And Suzee, I imagine in your business, a trend is something that's sustainable and people are going to make money and be able to open their doors at the end of the day.
Can I use one example? A bunch of mates started a brewery called Poulter Brewery, and they were looking at how do we sell this product? And this is going back to a trend thing. And I said, well, from my opinion, because they asked me for my opinion, the best way to sell it is in a can. Because if you throw a can in the bin in Melbourne anyway, it's back on the shelf within 21 days. And it doesn't lose any value when you recycle it. So you can recycle a can 1 million times and it's still as good as the very first time. And you only use 1/10 of the energy to make that can when you're making it from recycled cans. So I said, not only that, plus there's no light hitting the beer. That brewery's I think it's only 12 or 18 months old maybe, but it started this whole thing that all brewers are now releasing, even the big brewers, releasing beers in cans, not in glass. What are we using glass for today? We're using glass for road-based because it's not getting recycled into bottles. So to me, that trend is an incredibly good trend that has started because it's much more sustainable.
Yeah.
And then there's all the transport, because it's a light product. That's one example of a trend that is a brilliant trend. And if somebody like UberEats said, look, if you're going to provide drinks, do them in cans. Like I know winemakers that have called me and said, we struggle to sell our wine in cans because it's got that. But when you've got a quality beer that's winning all these awards that only sells in cans, people go, well, wow, that's now given me license to put a really premium product into.
Yeah, sure.
And obviously, I'm a big fan of innovating and testing and seeing what works. I think kind of customers are moving with technology to wanting things to be very convenient for them. They want to, when they're in their social life, they want to have really great experiences and want people to be providing that. But in their kind of everyday life, they want a lot of convenience. And I think that's going to stay. It's kind of, we're just moving in that on-demand generation, which kind of increasingly that's what people are going to expect. And, I think what's really exciting about technology in particular is that you can try things and you can see, do they work? Are they sustainable? Is it a one-off that people are excited by, or does it actually stay over time? And I'm personally really excited about, I think what you talked about was things like the health benefits. I think that's actually one of the benefits that UberEats has been able to bring to people is your takeaway food is now not only just something that maybe you're not feeling that happy about and the next day you feel a bit guilty about. It's actually amazing high quality food. Healthy is the top 3 search for term in pretty much all of our cities because that's what people are looking for. They want healthy, good food. The number 1 is burgers, right? Because that's the, number 2 is dessert, but then it's healthy. And so, sounds like my life.
I still say the 3 biggest vegetables sold in America, 60% of all vegetables sold in America, potatoes, lettuce and tomato.
Sure.
So the health message to me is a marketing message as opposed to perhaps a reality.
We see that as well. I mean, I own an online food publication, and we look at what people click on, and it is breakfast is the first, dessert is the second, and then vegan, health food, sustainable is the third. And it's just such an interesting way to look at it, and everybody you speak to in the industry says exactly the same thing. They're the three things that really, really go crazy.
It's another trend thing, like zero waste. In 2008, there was no one talking about that concept of zero waste, and now if you put that in as a hashtag, it's incredible, especially in London, New York, LA, Europe.
What I find interesting about this conversation is the original question you were supposed to tell me, whether it was burgers, tacos, fish and chips. What we've come out of here is that the trend is just doing the things that are responsible and making sure everything is commercially viable, and you said convenient, I think was the word. And I think that is the trend. People want things to be convenient, easy, and good, because people are time poor. So if it's not perfect first time, that's certainly going to create some problems. And
I think people also like to try new things. We find that when new restaurants are launched, there is a lot of buzz about it. People want newness, they want to try new brands, they want to try new things. And I think finding ways to be flexible without having huge costs behind it, I think is a really great way to bring innovation and new ideas to people. And if it's not expensive to do, then they don't need to last forever. It's just it's a bit of fun. People want fun.
Food in particular really comes under the pump for something new. We studied the Good Food Guides in a 10-year cycle, and only 10% of restaurants were still appearing in Good Food Guides 10 years on. And the most prevalent, in fact, if you ever want to open your own restaurant, was restaurants started with the letter B. Seem to hang around longer than
we certainly tell people to call their restaurant something that starts with A, B, C, because it's at the top of the list when people do it in letter format. So maybe there's something in that.
Maybe it's all linked.
For me, that's kind of where we sort of started off. Does anybody have anything they want to add? I think, Suzee, you have a lot to give people who are leasing, and I suppose, do you have something that you tell everybody when you first meet with them? Everybody has something.
Oh, I tell a lot of people a lot of things a lot of the time, really. But look, I think there's a big message which is the food boom for property developers at the moment. Everyone is on this food wave. We call it. We're moving from resources to main courses. Is how we're going, and a lot of questions are how can we. Every day we're showing a residential development that's got 150 new apartments, and the ground floor plane has been completely activated with pictures of people sitting outside, living an alfresco life in cafes. If there was a takeout to give the room, it's to say that even with the most perfect tsunami of a dining DNA, which is a trade area completely filled with employed millennials with an Asian bent, living in high-density rented accommodation. That's your perfect dining tsunami. Still, at the best of that, you can only sustain one restaurant for every 500 residents. So that's the truth of it, because I can buy 5 pairs of shoes in one go, but I can't eat 5 hamburgers. There's a reality to the 2,000 calories a day that we're meant to eat. So one restaurant for 500 people. Every day instead we see a development where we're asked, do you think we could get a Grounds of Alexandria in here?
I'm not the only person that gets asked.
There's got to be some responsibility and strategy in planning these things.
Suzee, I jump in there as well. With landlords, what I see a lot is they want their rent, but they're not willing to sacrifice, contribution or big contribution, because to create something like the grounds of the city takes a significant amount of money. And unfortunately, that's the way the world's going in experience, no matter what. Otherwise, you're going to get eaten up by the UberEats and the Amazons and all that. It's coming, and it's coming fast, and you can see it. So until landlords actually get to the point where they're going to have to say, hey, this is no longer just a lease-back scenario. This is actually a joint venture where we're trying to make our building a destination where people want to go. There's going to be a lot of trouble.
I suppose I would say I don't think we're seeing any data so far that says kind of Uber Eats is eating it's not in conflict, it's not in competition. We're not seeing that data. The kind of, restaurateurs are not telling us they're seeing that at all. So I think it's important not to kind of have that piece of food delivery is impacting kind of the restaurants. In actual fact, kind of to your point around there's only so many burgers, well, that is true. But we all eat 3 meals a day, and actually the food industry, if you were to look at kind of dining out as well as the fresh food industry, is huge. We all spend a large portion of our salaries on food. Now, if the mindset is that I'm creating a burger restaurant and that's what I'm selling, then within that, there's obviously limitations. But in that kitchen, you can be creating salads for the lunchtime. You can be creating multiple different foods. It doesn't all have to be there out where people are sitting and dining, but that building can be used for multiple different types of food preparation. And we're absolutely seeing people want the trend of convenience. They want to be able to order at breakfast and lunch and dinner fantastically high quality food at a reasonable price. And there are a number of entrepreneurs who are doing this well. And so I think I would say, at the beginning when online retail came, people couldn't quite understand how big is this? Do I need to sell my product on that? Does my brand need to be available? And I think there are very few brands nowadays who would not be willing to sell their products online. I think from a food perspective, and when working with people thinking about that, it's like, what are you going to do and what can you do in order to actually take full advantage of the new revenue streams that can come your way?
I think where I mean is kind of like wherever I live in Potts Point, right? You've got access to the restaurants around there. You're not going to get in your car, you walk out, you go. But now with the Uber being available to you, you've got a much more sustainable area to actually order food, so that person in Potts Point does actually get hurt because we're not buying from there anymore. And unfortunately, if you're not going to keep progressing and making your business better, that's what's going to happen. So I think it will be an issue for the people that aren't doing that.
It's certainly on the retailer, but I think, like both of you have said now, that there has to be a collaboration. It can't just be leasing agents just saying, well, here's a restaurant, you're amazing, good luck to you. There has to be a conversation around how that's going to work, how that fits in the community, whether it's sustainable, whether your neighbour is going to be your friend or you're going to work together, because restaurants do need to work together, particularly in strips from what I've seen. And not everybody is standalone. But I certainly think it's Uber working together with retail, working together with leasing. And I guess just for you, it's about making sure it's sustainable and everybody's sustainable as you go through that process.
Yeah.
Perfect. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Sorry. My question's for Joost. I'd just love to hear your prediction on how the big corporations like Woolworths and Coles will respond to this movement of growing food in cities, and what you think might happen there.
I think in 20 years' time they won't exist at all.
I'd hope you said that.
No, it's because of what we're talking about right now. Because why would you? First of all, you wouldn't. You'd support local. And I think it's actually going back to smaller. And I know that the data doesn't say that right now, but I think that if you, in the circles that I move and you move, it's, who goes to Safeway and Coles anymore? And that's, that for me is incredibly exciting to be able to and that's, I did an interview recently with the Financial Review, and the journalist just didn't get it at the start, and he was like, and then I started getting these late night text messages. He goes, fuck, I've just worked this out, and I've just worked this out. And he started working out the numbers, because I said, we don't have to actually pay anything more for food, but you could generate over $100,000 on a home, on a couple hundred square meters, just by growing food. And he said, that's impossible. So I started giving him some of the yields and numbers on different crops, and what kind of yield you get from an aquaponic system, and the penny dropped with him. And my point is that when that takes off, not only do you create an incredible social environment, you create buzz, the cities become so much nicer to live in. Like when you start thinking about creating productive urban areas, you're creating much more exciting urban areas to be in because you've got all this stuff going on. You've got all this sharing of knowledge. You've got all this sharing of experiences. You've got garages filled with mushroom farms, and you've got, guys growing, 15 different species of fish. I mean, these are some of my friends already doing this. This is happening. And that knowledge is getting shared through social media, YouTube channels, and it's only at the very start. But why would you go to a supermarket to get, a sustainable tuna? Like, we've caught 92% of the world's tuna. What, do we really need to start eating the last 8% that are left in the ocean? Shouldn't we just let them have a chance to recover and maybe start looking at what truly sustainable fish there is? Well, why don't we start growing fish where we live by utilising our waste? I mean, I'm working with the Queen Victoria Market at the moment on a project. They're generating 250 tonnes of fish offal just in that market alone. That's enough to grow a tonne of barramundi a week. Once you start understanding, the numbers and how things work, then you start understanding the potential, and it's so bloody exciting, and that's why so many people globally are getting into it.
We're going to just probably take one more question because we're going to need to wrap it up. But there's just a gentleman with his hand up here. Yeah, thanks, Nick.
Yes, we actually have a cheese cave in our garage, so there you go.
Yeah.
One thing I think the panel maybe missed out on in terms of the difference between Woolies and your amazingly interesting food production examples is the growth of farmers markets. I mean, that's something that we know a lot of people who are actually working in farmers markets around Brisbane. And it's all those things the panel's talking about. It's not just about getting great, often organic fruit, veggies and meats for that matter. It's also about the experience, about people actually taking the time off to go there. So it's interesting that, on one hand we're time poor and we're trying to we need to do everything by yesterday. But on the other hand, it's not just about going to restaurants for an experience, it's about doing your shopping for an experience, meeting people, getting to know the guy who actually does the brilliant pork and chicken, that he's actually the farmer. I mean, there's a guy in Milton who actually does pork and lamb, I think.
Yeah.
He's a classic. He's the guy who does it. And he can tell you the origins of that particular piece of meat. I think that's a real trend, and that's what's going to really. I think that's what Woolies and Coles are really looking over the shoulder about.
But that's also the reason why people are moving from farms. This is a global phenomenon. That's why there's now more people living in cities than. It's not because they can't make a dollar on their farms. It's because technology has meant that people don't exist on those farms anymore. So you've got a guy now, who can milk 200 cows on his own virtually with technology. Whereas, you go back 30 years ago, there'd be a team of people working there, so you had social interaction. So farm areas globally were socially full of people. There was a lot of workers needed. Now you can grow 5,000 acres of wheat, and you're the only person that lives on that farm. We're social beings. We want to be surrounded by people. We want to bounce ideas off each other. That, for me, is actually the number one reason why people are moving to urban areas. And, to see one person who is depressed and can't make a profit and, producing milk or wheat or whatever at below cost, why the bloody hell would you? Why not move that food production to where we live? Because I do a lot of tours with school kids, and I've kind of worked out that when I say I've got 30 kids, and I talk, it might be on the rooftop of the greenhouse or talking about food in a kitchen garden, I truly believe that 1 in every 3 of us gets incredibly excited about growing food. You can just see it. You can see a spark in an eye of a child, and to me, that doesn't change when you get older. So for me, I look at a city that's got 3 million people living in it. There's 1 million people that are doing something that aren't doing something that they would absolutely love to do. So there's no reason why in a city like Brisbane, a third of the population couldn't spend all their time growing the food, make good money, and then can you imagine how much more exciting our cities would be to live in if it was all about productivity and it was all about, and then the waste that the reduction in waste. That's when I did brothel. That's when I kind of realised I was collecting waste from places like Attica and Rockpool and turning that into food, and I kind of realised the whole system's fucked. The whole system's got to change. We can't just keep, doing things the same way.
I might stop you there just because we've run really over time already. We'll take this one offline. But firstly, we just have to draw a prize. So Ramsey, do you want to be the prize drawer? I'm going to get Adam to
Yeah.
come up, if that's all right.
I can do it. We might actually just wait
Okay,
because
sure.
we'll do it at the lunch later on when we've got everyone together.
Not a problem
Yeah.
at all. So Adam, we'll leave you to take over, but thanks guys for
Thank you.
Thank you very
your
much.
interesting views.